Ezekiel 42. Then the man led me northward into the outer court and brought me to the rooms opposite the temple courtyard and opposite the outer wall on the north side. The building whose door faced north was 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide, both in this section 20 cubits from the inner court, and in this section opposite the pavement of the outer court, gallery faced gallery at the three levels. In front of the rooms was an inner passageway, 10 cubits wide and 100 cubits long. Their doors were on the north. Now the upper rooms were narrower, for the galleries took more space from them than from the rooms on the lower and middle floors of the building. The rooms on the top floor had no pillars, as the courts had, so they were smaller in floor space than those on the lower and middle floors. There was an outer wall parallel to the rooms and the outer court. It extended in front of the rooms for 50 cubits. While the row of rooms on the next side to the outer court was 50 cubits long, the row on the side nearest the sanctuary was 100 cubits long. The lower rooms had an entrance on the east side as one enters them from the outer court. On the south side, along the length of the wall of the outer court adjoining the temple courtyard and opposite the outer wall were rooms with a passageway in front of them. These were like the rooms on the north. They had the same length and width, with similar exits and dimensions. Similar to the doorways on the north were the doorways of the rooms on the south. There was a doorway at the beginning of the passageway that was parallel to the corresponding wall extending eastward, by which one enters the rooms. Then he said to me, the north and south rooms facing the temple courtyard are the priests' rooms, where the priests who approach the Lord will eat the most holy offerings. There they will put the most holy offerings, the grain offerings, the sin offerings, and the guilt offerings, for the place is holy. Once the priest enters the holy precincts, they are not to go into the outer court until they leave behind the garments in which they minister, for these are holy. They are to put on other clothes before they go near the places that are for the people. Okay, now this to me is very interesting. So I'm sorry, I'm not necessarily reading very fluidly, but it says that so they put on particular garments when they're in the holy place, and then they put on other clothes before they go near the places that are for the people. And so when they go near the people, you're going to see that he also says so that they don't consecrate, the people are not consecrated by their clothes. That to me is very interesting. Like, why wouldn't you want the people to be consecrated by the clothes? Obviously, you wouldn't want them to be defiled, but why wouldn't you want them to be consecrated? Well, it kind of reminds me of God's heart with regard to hardening. That when he hardens you, when he hardens a person, he makes it so that they're not able to see, not able to hear, and not able to understand with their heart, because they haven't had a heart for him. And so, and otherwise, they would turn to him and be healed. And so here, I am getting the sense that God does not want them getting it that easily. He's not going to make it that easy. They need to consecrate themselves by living it out, by making a choice to be set apart to him. When he had finished measuring what was inside the temple area, he led me out by the east gate and measured the area all around. He measured the east side with the measuring rod. It was 500 cubits. He measured the north side. It was 500 cubits by the measuring rod. He measured the south side. It was 500 cubits by the measuring rod. He turned to the west side and measured. It was 500 cubits by the measuring rod. So he measured the area on all four sides. It had a wall around it, 500 cubits long and 500 cubits wide, to separate the holy from the common. You seeing the symbolism now? So he wants his priests to change their clothes, their holy clothes, before they are among the people. And he wants separation between the holy from the common. Now, I want to tell you something. I probably read this before, but last night I started to read Ezekiel. So I read, 40 through 46, I think it was. And I said to you in the last video, don't get hung up on things. Don't get frustrated. Just take what it is that he's giving you. Read it. I know that it's cumbersome to read 500 cubits and, 1 cubit and 2 cubits, an alcove and portico, and what in the world are all these things, right? It can get kind of cumbersome, and we can have this tendency to want to just skip over and be like, you know what, that doesn't really matter. He's just going through measurements, so let's just fast forward ahead. Don't do that. That is called cutting from the scroll. It's called basically making a decision of yourself that what God has put in the word, what he very clearly said in chapter 40 is to carefully detail this to the Israelites so that they can know the design of the temple for some reason. For some reason, he wants us to know this. And later on, he's going to say, because he wants us to feel ashamed. Why does he want us to feel ashamed? Because of the perfection of the temple. Because the temple was the apple of their eye. That was their pride and joy. This is, look, God resides among us, among our people. But they didn't remain humble about it. They didn't remain humble and understand that that was because of who he is, not because of who they are. And that they had a responsibility to continue to be God's people. Otherwise, they were going to be made an object of ridicule, a scorn among the nations, a byword. And so if they're looking at this temple and they know that this temple has nothing to do with them, they're going to feel ashamed. They're going to remember that those first two temples were destroyed because of their wickedness. They're going to be reminded of their filth. Now the theme that we're seeing is a separation of the holy from the common. The holy from the common. And don't wear these clothes around the people, because you don't want to consecrate them with these clothes. So you're going to see that in the next chapter. He's going to talk a little bit more about it. Then the man brought me to the gate facing east, and I saw the glory of God, the God of Israel, coming from the east. His voice was like the roar of rushing waters, and the land was radiant with his glory. What's the roar of rushing waters? What does it say in your key? Well, we talked about the roar of rushing waters being the voice of God, but what are waters? What is living water? What do we talk about in terms of rushing waters? Why is his voice like the roar of rushing waters? Because he's living water, and there's rushing waters literally coming from the mouth of God. The vision I saw was like the vision I had seen when he came to destroy the city, and like the visions I had seen. What city is he talking about? What city did he destroy? You remember Gog, G-O-G? Babylon, Gog and Magog, and like the visions I had seen by the Kibar River, and I fell face down. The glory of the Lord entered the temple through the gate facing east. Then the Spirit lifted me up and brought me into the inner court, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. I mean, the temple was magnificent before, but now it's like on a whole other level, isn't it? No human being can do that. While the man was standing beside me, I heard someone speaking to me from inside the temple. He said, "Son of man, this is the place of my throne, and the place for the soles of my feet. This is where I will live among the Israelites forever. The people of Israel will never again defile my holy name. Neither they nor their kings by their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings at their death, when they placed their threshold next to my threshold and their doorpost next to my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them, and they defiled my holy name by their detestable practices." Okay, so what is he saying here? When they placed their threshold next to my threshold, like they're an equal or something, and they placed their doorpost beside my doorpost. When we rush into God's presence and we're like even telling him off, like, why did you do that? Oh, you just hate me, don't you? You just hate me. When we're talking to him like that, we are not on equal plane with God. And if Esther and everyone in the Bible and you today, you were invited to go and visit a human king. Would you not prepare for that? Would you not put on the right clothes? Would you not study up and understand how you are to approach the king? So why don't you do that with your king, the King of Kings? They placed their threshold next to my threshold, their doorpost beside my doorpost, with only a wall between me and them. They defiled my holy name by their detestable practices. So I destroyed them in my anger. Now let them put away from me their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings, and I will live among them forever. Son of man, describe the temple to the people of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their sins. That they may be ashamed of their sins. What are the sins that they should be ashamed of? I mean, obviously all of their sins, but what are the sins that they should be ashamed of? He just went through talking about what they should be ashamed of. Their prostitution and the funeral offerings for their kings at their death. Now, I don't know exactly what this means. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but I have a brain and I have experience, and I can look around at the way that people act when a human king has died. They have a shrine for him. And God says, don't grieve for the dead. He says, mourn for the one who goes into exile. Death is nothing. As a matter of fact, if you know that someone is going to be with God, that they lived a good life, the one you're not to mourn a human death. death of the flesh, you are to mourn those who are going to go into exile. So much idolatry that happens when a human being dies, when human flesh dies. Oh, they were such a good person. And, you immediately forget all of the things that they did that weren't so good. And you idolize them and you glorify them and you exalt them. And you set up a shrine to worship them. No human being deserves that. Let them put away from me their prostitution and the funeral offerings of their kings, and I will live among them forever. Son of man, describe the temple to the people of Israel, that they may be ashamed of their sins. Let them consider its perfection. And if they are ashamed of all they have done, make known to them the design of the temple, its arrangement, its exits and entrances, its whole design, and all its regulations and laws. Write these down before them so that they may be faithful to its design and follow all its regulations. Okay, so if we're a temple individually, and then we're a temple collectively, have I talked to you about the design of your temple as an individual? Have I talked to you about that? Mind, body, heart, and spirit, that's your soul. Mind, body, heart, and spirit. Mind, body, flesh, heart, spirit, that's where you're being reborn. That's where you're reborn here. He pulls out that heart of stone, gives to you a heart of flesh, places his spirit in your heart, and he begins to move you to follow his laws and keep his decrees. That's the place where you're supposed to worship him in the spirit and in truth. He is spirit. He's going to communicate with your spirit. Your spirit is willing, but your flesh is weak. Where do you think he wants you to live? So there's a design, huh? And in order for you to understand how you must live, how you must fulfill your covenant, you have to understand that design. Well, why does he want you to understand this design? Well, he just said right there, write these down before them so that they may be faithful to its design and follow all its regulations. So we don't get to make our own cathedrals and mega churches and sit and talk about the design of God's kingdom. We are supposed to rend our heart to what he has told us about the design of his kingdom, how we are to behave, how we are to worship, how we are to do things with good order, how we are to revere him, how we are to revere one another. We don't get to rewrite this covenant. If we want to be there, then we need to be faithful to the design that he has ordained, that he has said, this is how you are to live. This is how you are to come in, and this is how you are to go out. So he's going to talk a little bit more about that. This is the law of the temple. All the surrounding area on the top of the mountain will be most holy. Such is the law of the temple. So at the top of that mountain is what is most holy. So this is a stratified temple. The top of that mountain versus the bottom of that mountain. The top of the mountain is to be most holy. These are the measurements of the altar in long cubits, the cubit being a cubit and a handbreadth. Its gutter is a cubit deep and a cubit wide with a rim of one span around the edge. And this is the height of the altar. From the gutter on the ground up to the lower ledge that goes around the altar, it is 2 cubits high, and the ledge is a cubit wide. From this lower ledge to the upper ledge that goes around the altar, it is 4 cubits high, and that ledge is also a cubit wide. Above that, the altar hearth is 4 cubits high, and the 4 horns project upward from the hearth. The altar hearth is square, 12 cubits long and 12 cubits wide. The upper ledge is also square, 14 cubits long and 14 cubits wide. All around the altar is a gutter of 1 cubit with a rim of half a cubit. The steps of the altar face east. Then he said to me, Son of man, this is what the sovereign Lord says. These will be the regulations for sacrificing burnt offerings and splashing blood against the altar when it is built. You are to give a young bull as a sin offering to the Levitical priests of the family of Zadok who come near to minister before me, declares the sovereign Lord. You are to take some of its blood and put it on the horns of the altar and on the 4 corners of the upper ledge and all around the rim, and so purify the altar and make atonement for it. You are to take the bull for the sin offering and burn it in the designated part of the temple area outside the sanctuary. On the 2nd day, you are to offer a male goat without defect for a sin offering, and the altar is to be purified as it was purified with the bull. When you have finished purifying it, you are to offer a young bull and a ram from the flock, both without defect. You are to offer them before the Lord, and the priests are to sprinkle salt on them and sacrifice them as a burnt offering to the Lord. For 7 days, you are to provide a male goat daily for a sin offering. You are also to provide a young bull and a ram from the flock, both without defect. For 7 days, they are to make atonement for the altar and cleanse it. Thus, they will dedicate it. At the end of these days, from the 8th day on, the priests are to present burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar. Then I will accept you, declares the sovereign Lord. Then the man brought me back to the outer gate of the sanctuary, the one facing east, and it was shut. The Lord said to me, the gate is to remain shut. It must not be opened. No one may enter through it. It is to remain shut because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. Why is it to remain shut? Because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered through it. The prince himself is the only one who may sit inside the gateway to eat in the presence of the Lord. He is to enter by way of the portico of the gateway and go out the same way. Then the man brought me by way of the north gate to the front of the temple. I looked and saw the glory of the Lord filling the temple, the glory of the Lord filling the temple of the Lord, and I fell face down. The Lord said to me, Son of man, look carefully, listen closely, and give attention to everything I tell you concerning all the regulations and instructions regarding the temple of the Lord. Give attention to the entrance to the temple and all of the exits of the sanctuary. Say to rebellious Israel, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Enough of your detestable practices, people of Israel. In addition to all your other detestable practices, you brought foreigners, uncircumcised in heart and flesh, into my sanctuary, desecrating my temple while you offered me food, fat, and blood, and you broke my covenant. Instead of carrying out your duty in regard to my holy things, you put others in charge of my sanctuary. This is what the sovereign Lord says. No foreigner uncircumcised in heart and flesh is to enter my sanctuary, not even foreigners who live among the Israelites. Does he want you to be ashamed? Does he want you to remember what you did previously in his covenant and in his temple? The Levites who went far from me when Israel went astray and who wandered from me after their idols must bear the consequences of their sins. They may serve in my sanctuary, having charge of the gates of the temple and serving in it. They may slaughter the burnt offerings and the sacrifices for the people and stand before the people and serve them. But because they served them in the presence of their idols and made the people of Israel fall into sin, therefore I have sworn with uplifted hand that they must bear the consequences of their sin, declares the sovereign Lord. So now we have priests, we have the people, and then we have the Levites who are going to serve the people. This is who we know is in this temple. This is who we know is in this kingdom right now. The priests, the people, the Levites who are to serve the people. Okay, verse 11 again. They may serve in my sanctuary, having charge of the gates of the temple and serving in it. They may slaughter the burnt offerings and sacrifices for the people and stand before the people and serve them. But because they served them in the presence of their idols and made the people of Israel fall into sin, therefore I have sworn with uplifted hand that they must bear the consequences of their sin, declares the sovereign Lord. They are not to come near me, near to serve me as priests, or come near any of my holy things or my most holy offerings. They must bear the shame of their detestable practices, and I will appoint them to guard the temple for all the work that is to be done in it. But the Levitical priests, who are descendants of Zadok, and who guarded my sanctuary when the Israelites went astray from me, are to come near to minister before me. They are to stand before me to offer sacrifices of fat and blood, declares the sovereign Lord. So, the descendants of Zadok, who are Levitical priests, they can minister before the Lord. The Levites cannot. They alone are to enter my sanctuary. They alone are to come near my table to minister before me and serve me as guards. Okay, blessed are the pure of heart, for they will see the face of God. Not everyone's going to see the face of God. When they enter the gates of the inner court, they are to wear linen clothes. They must not wear any woolen garments while ministering at the gates of the inner court or inside the temple. They are to wear linen turbans on their heads and linen undergarments around their waists. They must not wear anything that makes them perspire. When they go out into the outer court where the people are, they are to take off their clothes they have been ministering in and are to leave them in the sacred rooms and put on other clothes so that the people are not consecrated through contact with their garments. There's that statement that I talked about earlier. They must not shave their heads or let their hair grow long, but they are to keep the hair of their heads trimmed. No priest is to drink wine When he enters the inner court, they must not marry widows or divorced women. They may marry only virgins of Israelite descent or widows of priests. I don't know what that's all about, because there will be no marriage in the next age. We will be like the angels, so I'm not sure what this means. They are to teach my people the difference between the holy and the common, and show them how to distinguish between the unclean and the clean. In any dispute, the priests are to serve as judges and decide it according to my ordinances. They are to keep my laws and my decrees for all my appointed festivals, and they are to keep my Sabbaths holy. A priest must not defile himself by going near a dead person. However, if the dead person was his father or mother, son or daughter, brother or unmarried sister, then he may defile himself. After he is cleansed, he must wait 7 days. On the day he goes into the inner court of the sanctuary to minister in the sanctuary, he is to offer a sin offering for himself, declares the sovereign Lord. I am to be the only inheritance the priests have. You are to give them no possession in Israel. I will be their possession. They will eat the grain offerings, the sin offerings, and the guilt offerings, and everything in Israel devoted to the Lord will belong to them. The best of all the first fruits and of all your special gifts will belong to the priests. You are to give them the first portion of your ground meal, so that a blessing may rest on your household. The priest must not eat anything, whether bird or animal, found dead or torn by wild animals. Okay, let's stop there. We have to discern this piece. We're going to have to discern this piece about, well, first of all, he's talking about sacrifices and things like that. And we know that there are no sacrifices that are being continued in this third temple. We know that in the next age, there's not going to be marriage. So we have to discern these pieces. We have to understand this. We're going to continue on reading and hope that God is going to reveal this to you, believe that God is going to reveal this to us. But we're going to take a little pause here, because that was a lot of chapters for one study, and we'll continue on in the next study. Thank you for listening.